terrifying mythological creatures from cultures around the world. And first up is the Nuckelavee, a horse demon from the Orkney Islands of Scotland, and I genuinely cannot think of a worse thing to stumble into on a dark night. It looks like a man fused onto a horse, which is already extremely concerning, and oh yeah, it has absolutely no skin. None. Just black blood, exposed tendons, yellow muscle, and one enormous red eye burning like something is very wrong in there. This festering nightmare wanders the land, spreading plague across crops and livestock, because naturally it despises everything that lives. The Manananggal is believed to be a woman who entered willingly into dark sorcery, trading an ordinary life for powers that are, let us be fair, genuinely impressive, though the side effects are considerable. During daylight hours, she walks among communities completely undetected, just a regular woman going about her day, perhaps stopping at a market, perhaps saying good morning to her neighbors. Nothing remotely alarming happening here. At night, however, the wings emerge, enormous, leathery, bat-like affairs that span wide enough to make you immediately reconsider every decision that led you outdoors this evening. And then, and this is the part that is quite difficult to emotionally recover from, her upper torso physically separates from her lower half at the waist with apparent ease, clean, off. The legs remain standing in whatever secluded spot she has selected, perfectly upright, like the world's most unsettling scarecrow, while the rest of her takes flight to conduct the evening's business. She favors pregnant women above all other prey because the Manananggal operates on a strict 2-for-1 basis, and she's very committed to that philosophy. She drifts above darkened rooftops and extends a long, impossibly thin tubular tongue through small gaps in the roof to feed on blood. Mother and unborn child both, since she is efficient and thorough. It is said she can detect a pregnant woman from a remarkable distance, drawn by something in the composition of the household below. She is also reported to have a particular fondness for the hearts and livers of the unborn, which is a sentence I genuinely regret having to write. And yet, here we find ourselves. After feeding, she returns to her abandoned legs before the sun comes up, reattaches at the waist, and resumes her completely normal daily existence without incident. Now the good news, and there genuinely is some this time, which makes a pleasant change. The Manananggal cannot rejoin her legs if you find the lower half and coat the severed waist in salt, ash, or crushed garlic before dawn arrives. No reattachment means no surviving sunrise. So if you have any suspicion that your neighbor may be a Manananggal, perhaps the livestock seem nervous, perhaps she always looks slightly smug at breakfast, simply locate the spare legs she left somewhere nearby and season them appropriately. A seasoning-based countermeasure against an ancient supernatural predator is precisely the kind of practical tip that makes folklore genuinely worth knowing. Now, we head to West Africa, and a creature that will permanently change how you feel about fireflies, which is unfortunate because they were perfectly pleasant before this. The Adze comes from the folklore of the Yu people of Ghana and Togo, and it is deceptive in a way that feels deliberately, personally unfair. In its default form, the Adze is a firefly, just a small, harmless, softly glowing insect drifting through warm evening air, the kind of thing that makes you pause and briefly appreciate the world. It is said to pass through locked doors, sealed windows, and the smallest cracks in walls, as though physical barriers are merely polite suggestions, and once inside a sleeping home, it feeds directly on blood, targeting children most aggressively, because it is nothing if not consistent. What truly distinguishes the Adze as an adversary is that it only reveals its humanoid form when physically caught. This means your defensive strategy involves grabbing fireflies in the dark one at a time, on the chance that one of them is an ancient blood-drinking spirit, and then watching it transform into something substantially larger and considerably angrier in your hand. If transformation occurs, it is said to possess remarkable strength and will kill whoever caught it immediately. So, your investigative instincts have led you directly to a personal catastrophe, and that is on you. Communities historically identified individuals suspected of Adze possession by two primary signs: unusually good health and evidence of consuming human hearts, which must have made for a genuinely interesting conversation at the village level. Protection from the Adze depends largely on communal ritual practice and the involvement of those with proper spiritual authority, because the Adze was not designed with a convenient individual countermeasure. Certain protective charms and ceremonies are said to offer some deterrence. Other accounts suggest that once the Adze has identified you specifically as a target, the trajectory of events is essentially already determined. Very comforting. Remarkable creature. Truly remarkable. Moving briskly on. And now we arrive at the Yara-ma-yha-who, an entity from Australian Aboriginal folklore that presents as thoroughly absurd and then quietly becomes one of the more unsettling entries on this list once the full process is explained. It is described as a small red man, roughly 4 feet tall, with a head that is disproportionately enormous for its body, and a mouth that contains no teeth whatsoever. The Yara-ma-yha-who is equipped with octopus-style suckers on the ends of its fingers and toes, which raises significant questions about whatever designed it. It is said to wait in fig trees, and it is very specifically fig trees. The Yara-ma-yha-who has strong real estate preferences, perfectly motionless in the branches until a traveler pauses in the shade beneath it for rest. Once the traveler settles, the Yara-ma-yha-who drops directly onto them and uses its suckers to drain blood, weakening but not killing the victim. Then, in the move that sets this creature apart from every straightforward predator on this list, it swallows the person whole. Then it rests. Then it regurgitates the victim alive, but noticeably shorter than before. Then it repeats the entire sequence. Each cycle returns the victim slightly more diminished, shorter, redder, progressively less recognizable as the person they were when they stopped for a quiet rest beneath a fig tree. This continues until what remains is no longer the original person at all, but a fully formed new Yara-ma-yha-who, which means this creature is not hunting so much as it is recruiting, and it is very patient about the whole arrangement. The most effective protection against the Yara-ma-yha-who, according to various accounts, involves simply pretending to be dead or playing entirely limp and unresponsive during the consumption process. Apparently, the creature finds this approach tedious and may abandon the project midway through, which raises the philosophical question of whether a survival strategy against something that has already swallowed you alive technically counts as playing dead, or whether you have moved past the point where that distinction carries any meaningful weight. Either way, if you are resting beneath a fig tree and feel unexpectedly drowsy, relocate to open ground immediately. The fig tree knew exactly what it was doing when it offered you that shade. Exercise appropriate suspicion of generous foliage going forward. Now we travel to the northern forests of North America for the Wendigo, a creature from the oral traditions of several indigenous peoples, including the Algonquin and Ojibwe. And this one commands genuine respect as a horror entity, because it operates on a mechanism specifically calibrated to ensure you can never feel entirely safe in winter. The Wendigo begins as a person, a completely ordinary human being, who, driven by the extreme desperation of cold season starvation, resorts to consuming human flesh. This act, it is said, opens something inside them that cannot be closed again. What walks back out of the forest is no longer the person who entered. The Wendigo is described as a towering, emaciated figure, skeletal and vast despite its impossible thinness, perpetually starving, always cold to the touch, lips blackened, eyes hollow, trailing the smell of decay and frozen ground wherever it moves. It is said to be ravenous beyond any conceivable measure. Every meal intensifies the hunger rather than addressing it. There is no satiation point. There is no rest. Just an endless accelerating appetite driving it through the dark trees, forever and without relief. What distinguishes this creature beyond its physical form is Wendigo psychosis, a historically documented phenomenon in which living humans began exhibiting symptoms of believing they were actively transforming into one. Communities in the historical record took this seriously enough that individuals who displayed the condition were sometimes executed before the process could proceed further. The Wendigo was not simply a monster in the forest you might avoid with sensible travel decisions. It was also a transmissible idea, capable of installing itself inside an entirely ordinary person, with no prior supernatural exposure whatsoever. That gives it a substantially more alarming operational radius than most mythological predators can credibly claim. It hunts from the inside, which is a considerably more efficient strategy than lurking in trees. Consider yourself thoroughly boned if the idea finds you. There is reportedly no reliable individual countermeasure. Make consistently ethical food choices in extreme cold. Bundle up. That is the entirety of available guidance, and I recognize it is not much. Right then. Brazil. The Encantado. And I want to be absolutely clear that I researched this particular creature with complete professionalism and total journalistic objectivity from start to finish. The Encantado is a supernatural being from Amazonian river folklore, primarily associated with the Bodo River dolphin, and it is said to manifest as a strikingly attractive, but impeccably dressed, supernaturally charming individual who emerges from the river at night to attend local festivities, dance with remarkable skill, and pursue romantic entanglements with whatever humans take its interest. The catch, and there is always a catch on this list, you would think I would have absorbed the pattern by now, is that the Encantado is a river dolphin wearing a metaphysical human costume, and it never removes its hat under any circumstances whatsoever, because the hat is covering the blowhole. Obviously. So naturally, being the culturally informed and observationally gifted individual that I am, I would recognize this the moment I walked in. Excuse me. I could not help but notice you from across the room. Exceptional dancer. Truly exceptional. The hat? Very bold, very structural, admirably committed. Quick question. Purely out of curiosity and absolutely not suspicion, is the hat load-bearing in some way? Is there a specific reason the hat stays on indoors at a riverside festival? If I could just have one quick look. You know what? Forget the hat. Great hat. Some people have a deeply meaningful relationship with their headwear, and that is completely valid. Carry on. The Encantado is said to cause obsessive attraction, unexplained illness and madness in those it pursues, and certain otherwise puzzling pregnancies in Amazonian river communities have historically been attributed to Encantado encounters, a situation the tradition frames as producing children of unusual spiritual significance, which is a generous and diplomatically admirable framing of the circumstances. The most reliable protective measure is simply declining to socialize with anyone at a riverside gathering whose hat appears structurally essential to their continued existence. If the most attractive person present refuses to remove their hat under any conceivable circumstances and carries a faint ambient smell of river about them, I am not saying leave immediately. I am entirely saying leave immediately. Dry land, no music, no charming strangers with load-bearing hats. That is the full protective protocol. From the rivers of Brazil, we arrive in South Carolina, and the Boohag, a creature from Gullah Geechee tradition that targets sleeping humans in a manner that is both impressively precise and deeply unpleasant. The Boohag is a witch who removes her own skin at night. This is the third skin-adjacent entry on this list, and I want to formally acknowledge the escalating pattern. And in her exposed, skinless state slides through cracks and gaps into sleeping homes to mount the chests of chosen victims and ride them through the hours of darkness, steadily draining breath and vital energy while they sleep. Victims wake the following morning exhausted, sore, and entirely convinced they simply did not rest well enough. The Gullah tradition is culturally rich, historically significant, and layered with genuine meaning. And sitting inside it is an extremely specific warning. If you wake up every morning feeling like something spent the night using you as furniture, the explanation may be considerably more literal than you initially assumed. The defeat protocol is, I'm relieved to tell you, aggressively manageable for something that sounds this alarming. Place a broom beside your door before going to sleep. The Boohag, upon entering the home, is by the nature of her condition compelled to count every single individual straw in the broom before she can proceed any further, which occupies her entirely until dawn arrives and forces her to retreat. A broom, against a creature that voluntarily removes her own skin as a precondition for recreational nocturnal predation. The primary defense is a broom from any hardware store for approximately $5. Additionally, painting your door or porch the specific shade known as haint blue, a pale gray-tinged blue historically mixed with indigo, is said to repel the hag entirely, as she mistakes the color for water and spirits of her classification cannot cross water. Rub yourself with salt before sleeping for supplementary insurance. The full protective suite costs under $15, takes an afternoon, and leaves you with a nicely painted door and an entirely reasonable amount of peace of mind going forward. Now we arrive at Romania and the Strigoi, who is the creature that essentially wrote the foundational text from which the modern world assembled its entire understanding of vampires, and who turns out upon closer inspection to be considerably more complicated and demanding than that popular version implies. The Strigoi is either someone who died carrying unfinished business so urgent that death did not cleanly take, or someone born under circumstances sufficiently inauspicious that mortality never quite settled properly into place. They emerge from their graves and begin systematically draining the life force from those nearest to them. Livestock first, then family members, moving outward through the community in an organized sequence that suggests a strong preoccupation with finishing what they started. This makes the Strigoi notable for its deep organizational commitment to resolving domestic grievances from beyond the grave, which is a dedication I find professionally admirable and personally catastrophic. They are said to grow stronger with each feeding, progressing from barely animate remains to something disturbingly vigorous, given that it has no physiological justification for that vigor whatsoever. Communities historically reported a recognizable pattern of Strigoi activity. Livestock dying in sequence, starting with the weakest animals, an unexplained spreading pallor among family members closest to the recently deceased, and the specific unsettling sense that the buried individual had not entirely committed to the arrangement. Reports were taken seriously at the community level and treated as a practical problem requiring a practical solution, which is the only sensible perspective when the alternative is a steadily strengthening undead entity working through your household with apparent purpose. The traditional defeat requirements are extensive, and I want to be upfront about that. You must identify the correct grave, excavate it with full awareness of what you are about to encounter. Assess the corpse for specific indicators of Strigoi activity that I will mercifully spare you the anatomical detail of, then stake it through the chest, fill the mouth with garlic, sever the head, burn what remains, and scatter the ashes into running water. That is 6 distinct, significant steps, several requiring specialized tools, and an extremely robust tolerance for conditions I will not describe further. Compare this to the Boohag, which required a broom and a pot of blue paint, and you begin to appreciate that the Strigoi was designed by folklore with absolute indifference to your schedule or your nerves. There is a preventative option. Bury any individual you suspect may become a Strigoi with thorns, iron objects, and protective herbs packed into the coffin before interment. You can alternatively wait it out. Certain accounts hold that the Strigoi will eventually exhaust its attachment to the living on its own and simply stop. I would not recommend the waiting strategy. The timeline runs to decades, and the livestock situation deteriorates considerably in the interim. And finally, this last one is for the people who made it all the way through, because you have earned something genuinely obscure. The Ahuizotl, from Aztec mythology of Mesoamerica, A creature so specifically strange that once described it simply occupies a permanent room in your memory without asking. The Ahuizotl resembles a dog, a smooth-furred, dog-shaped animal that lives in and near water. That part is manageable. It has hands, which is where things begin to deteriorate rapidly. It also has a hand at the end of its tail. A fifth hand, fully operational, evolved specifically for reaching up from beneath the water's surface and seizing fishermen, swimmers, and anyone standing too close to the bank with insufficient situational awareness. It drags them under. There is no warning sign. The first indication you have that an Ahuizotl is present is the hand on your ankle, which arrives from a direction that doesn't make physical sense, and then water. The body surface later missing their eyes, teeth, and nails, consumed specifically, suggesting a creature with very refined tastes and no interest whatsoever in the rest of the situation it created. The Ahuizotl was considered sacred to Tlaloc, the Aztec deity of rain and water, meaning its victims were understood as divinely claimed rather than simply unlucky. A cultural interpretation that does an impressive amount of rhetorical work on behalf of what is, structurally speaking, a five-handed water dog with a specific dental agenda. It lured prey by crying at the water's edge in a sound resembling a human child in distress, drawing people in through ordinary instinct. The fish in surrounding waters served as its personal surveillance network and would alert it to nearby approach. The complete picture is a dog-shaped, five-handed, child cry-producing aquatic ambush predator with divine backing, a dedicated fish intelligence service, and an extremely selective appetite. Avoiding it requires treating all bodies of water with the suspicion they probably always deserved, and not approaching any riverbank where the fish appear to be watching you with focused, organized attention. Difficult to verify in real time. Exercise appropriate caution going forward. So there we have it. Terrible creatures from 6 different cultures across the world, each of them arriving through independent mythology at broadly similar conclusions about what humanity is fundamentally for. Do they exist? Of course not, and suggesting so would be silly. What does exist is this video, which I will see you in shortly.